I think there's a fair bit of art and a fair bit of science to it. And I think each digester is a little different because of what you feed it. I look at the robots milking cows constantly and I'm like, well, I'm sure we can get this other thing to work. I don't think the public realizes how far we're pushing and how hard we're working to make such small adjustments in a lot of ways. And I think that's a really important story to be told.
Hi, and welcome to the Ag Podcast. I'm Crystal Mackay, and I am thrilled to be your host to guide us through some thought-provoking questions about farming with some experts who know it best from the ground up. Farm puns always intended here. Let's talk about food and food waste. Canadians create over 50 million tons of food waste every year, and Canada has pledged to reduce that by half. Redirecting surplus food could save 3.82 tons of greenhouse gas emissions per ton of food. In Canada, emissions from farm manure represent about 1/5 of a farm's carbon footprint. Some farms across Canada are now investing in biodigesters, which can turn food waste and manure into compost, which can be used for fertilizer and gas that can be burned and turned into energy. Today, I'm excited to learn more about this from an expert in the field. I can't help myself with the foreign puns. Joining us from Chilliwack, BC is George Dick. He's joining us from his dairy farm and enterprise known as Dicklands Biogas. Welcome, George. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, let's get started with the basics. Maybe you could help us understand what exactly is an anaerobic biodigester and how does it work?
Well, it's in its concept, it's actually quite simple. It's a tank that has a cover on it and sealed, which you pump manure into. In our case, we pump manure and we pump food waste into it. That manure and food waste is kept at basically a body temperature, roughly around 39 degrees Celsius. And the naturally occurring bacteria that are in the manure are basically optimized in this situation to create methane. Methane being about 60% CH4 and about 40% CO2. That's called what's called biogas. That's kind of the gas that is coming directly out of the tanks. In our case, we are taking that gas and we're actually cleaning this carbon dioxide out of it to make a pipeline quality gas that's going into the local grid, which would then power your furnace or your stove or whatever. It's totally exactly the same as fossil gas, except for its origin is completely on a recycled basis.
How long ago did you get your digester and why? Like, that's not a typical farm purchase.
About a year ago that we started putting gas into the grid, a little bit more than that. But why we did it sometimes remains a mystery to me. But it's something that I felt that there was something. It was part of the future. It was part of diversification of income streams. It's part of long-term environmental stewardship, but it's also long-term, economic stewardship, because we're a limited land base here. So if we can take our manure, turn it, make gas, and then beyond that, our system is designed to make clean water and a fertilizer pellet. And so that way we don't need as much land for our manure, or any land in theory. And so that allows us to expand our farm without having the limitations of having enough land for manure to spread. So that's kind of the core concepts of why we did it.
How is it working? Like, what are you adding in there? You mentioned food waste.
So it's working fairly well. It's not yet where we want it exactly to be. I think the challenge with digesters is, I think there's a fair bit of art and a fair bit of science to it. And I think uh, each digester is a little different because of what you feed it, and how it's set up. And so um, I feel like the body of knowledge on digesters, it really needs to grow, and that's from electricians to plumbers to just service people.
Mm.
We know dairy really well. Let's say a lot of people know dairy and what dairy needs, and there's a lot of allied trades and all these people that are there to support that industry. And biogas isn't quite the same that way. You're more of
Mm.
an island to yourself, and so I think that's part of it. If you want to talk about widespread adoption, I think the biggest thing is people and having understanding. More people having understanding is going to be the biggest help, because um, I would say I don't recommend farmers do it where I am sitting today, um, because it's very difficult, and it shouldn't be, but it just right now it's just very difficult, and the economics, I would say, post COVID are harder, just with inflation, than they were. Um, but I think it's just it needs a bit of time to develop um, the people, the technology. I think bringing prices down on some of the stuff, it's very specialized still. We need to standardize it a little bit more.
So, if you've liked what you've heard and heard so far, please like and subscribe, share this podcast with your circles, and leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. You milk with robots, right? So it's
Yeah,
kind of like the early days of robots. It's like, if the technology came from Germany, who's your local service provider? Who knows how to
yeah.
fix it? Those kinds of things,
It's
right?
very similar, and that's how I look at it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is I look at the robots milking cows constantly, and I'm like, well, I'm sure we can get this other thing to work. And it is, and
Yeah.
I shouldn't downplay it. It is working. I think our limiting factor is still getting enough food waste into our system. So procuring that food
Okay.
waste, finding the right kinds of food waste. So we take a lot of different wastes. We would take, fats, oils, and grease, typical from grease trap clean out. But we also take things like
Okay.
packaged food waste. We have a depackaging machine, so we can
Oh,
depackage.
cool.
Like right now, we have a lot of almond milk, because there's an almond
Mm,
milk recall.
the
So
recall.
yeah,
Yeah.
so we have a bunch of almond milk on pallets, and we can just dump those pallets off into our machine, and that separates the packaging and the liquid. And so we're taking products
Wow.
like that. Um, Sometimes it's off spec product that's all
Mm,
pre-consumer. We're also taking post-consumer. We're taking some post-consumer stuff. So some food waste bins from North Van, basically. Our local area, they have food waste and yard waste mixed together, which isn't what we want. We don't really want
mm,
branches and tree parts. But
right.
in some jurisdictions, they do separate food waste, and so we're taking some of that as well.
What do you think would make it easier? If your neighbor wanted to start up one tomorrow, what would make their journey easier based on your learnings?
I think for us, some of it would be permitting, um, access to pipeline, or access to an injection site for a pipeline. There isn't one locally available that's like a communal
Mm,
somewhere where people could bring a trailer and inject. Um, I think something like that in the valley here would actually work quite well, because we're
mhm,
quite close in location. So we could, virtual pipeline with trailers to a mate like a hub. I think that would be. I kind of feel that's the way we should go
mm,
here in the valley if other farms wanted to do it, just because then
mhm,
we could potentially go into, the main line, and that would allow that gas the most flexibility in where it goes and get the highest value. But so there's
okay.
that. So there's your outlet part, or where you're selling your gas to. I have a really good contract with Fortis, a long term agreement, which is really good for me because I can loan my money against it, and that's how I did it. But I think going forward, maybe there's other opportunities, um, kind of using a communal hub and
Mhm,
something like that. And then yeah, I think the people part, having local people that understand. Um, the more local people that you have that you could call if you need help, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, when you started with your answer about the hub, I was thinking at the other side, like securing the food waste.
The food waste is really a challenge in the long term. I see that we need to probably go to manure only digesters and have some that are mixed and some that are just because um, there's lots of food waste out there, but getting the right kind of food waste and getting the food waste clean enough is a challenge. And as soon as there's demand for the food waste, now all of a sudden everyone wants money for this energy that's in the food waste, right? And so it's a strange dynamic. Um, and so I think building really cost effective digesters that are manure only, that are processing it and maybe making a value added product like a fertilizer pellet or something, and then trying to get that gas that they create into the highest and best market is probably you know the best way to go for most people. And then there's certainly going to be the outliers like
Simplest.
me that are
Yeah,
dealing with both food waste and manure.
that makes sense. Is there a market for that fertilizer pellet?
We're selling some. We're going to, the goal is to get it to some kind of classification or certification so that it can be used, uh, you know, maybe certified for organic use. It's a little bit challenging because we have mechanical separation of our food waste, and they don't like that. Um, Ironically, if we composted it and then mechanically separated it, um, then it would be okay because it's a different process and it's a different mechanical separation of a dry product. So it's sort of, I think it's because we're a little bit new technology or a little bit different,
Mm-hmm.
and so we need to kind of forge a path there a little bit and going, this is a highest best use for this energy, right? This energy that's in the food waste. It's like, let us take the sloppy, wet food wastes. Composting is great for your yard waste and some of the other products,
Mm-hmm.
but it actually is detrimental. The wet stuff is actually detrimental to that process because if you're too wet, your piles actually become anaerobic, and so um,
Right.
highest best use of some of these food wastes is definitely anaerobic digestion. So we need to kind of tell that story that that's the most logical course of action. Put that in a digester, harvest as much energy as possible,
Mm.
and then still retain your nutrients and all those things in your fertilizer pellet or your composted
Yeah.
product at the end.
Big picture, kind of going 30,000 feet up from your farm to Canada. What do you think are the big opportunities for digesters and as part of our food system or caring for our planet or this race to net zero?
Yeah, I think there's a pretty big opportunity for the AD, probably in manure only, or some obviously will be a mixed. But I think we need to focus our energy on making the economics of a manure only work because that'll be able to fit more farms, more places, more situations. Um, I think if you look at even beef feedlots in places like that, there's a lot of opportunity there as well. They've got a lot of cow numbers. They have a lot of manure. We
Mhm.
can make some energy. We can then, make a higher, better quality fertilizer that can go back to the land, and hopefully,
Mhm.
by digesting and processing, we have a lower carbon footprint at getting that nutrients back to the land, at the end of the day, and a better efficiency.
Yeah.
The goal being, better efficiency of the nitrogen cycle. That's we try
Mhm.
really work hard on at our place. We can't have ammonia loss. We need to scavenge as much as possible. We need to get that into the pellet because, in the long run, that's going to be really important in our overall cycle.
Mm, I love that. The consistency, efficiency, you know exactly what you're dealing with. And you think about we're having this conversation today. It was only decades ago people were hand forking manure off the back of a wagon, in huge clumps.
Yeah,
And then our old manure spreaders, we've come a long
we
way,
have
baby,
come a
as they
long way,
say,
and
right?
I
And
think
this is
agriculture's come a long
yeah,
way too. And I think
yeah.
I don't think the public realizes how far we're pushing and how hard we're working to make such small adjustments in a lot of ways. And I think that's a really important story to be told. Is that there is a lot of people working on the forefronts of soil conservation or nutrient efficiency or working at carbon loss or nitrogen loss in systems, and feeding cows more efficiently and breeding cows to convert energy more efficiently. So we're not a technology company. We don't have an app, so we're not cool and hip, but we're definitely doing a lot of real down to earth stuff, and it's quite it's taking the newest information and technology and adapting it as soon as possible. That's agriculture. So
I think there's a tagline in there somewhere about like from GPS to down to earth, we're growing your food and caring for the planet at the same time, right? I think we got something there. We got to keep on with that. So one final question. This podcast, I don't think you knew this, George, but we actually have a magic wand, and you're able to give some advice or some insights to every farmer in Canada very magically. So what advice would you share to any farmer, current or future, just based on your experience related to digesters?
I think the number one thing that I tell people is, you have to learn it yourself. You have to take the time to really understand it. If someone comes and says, "Hey, I got this project I want to do on your farm, and this is how we'll do it, and it'll be awesome," and kind of is giving you a sales pitch, I mean, that's good, that's great. But ask questions and actually drill down. You really need to educate yourself, and I'll say that's hard. It is hard because we're called as farmers to educate ourselves about everything. So we're supposed to educate ourselves about my up to date on my farm as far as my approvals and your permitting and you have to study more about genetics, and what did they just learn out about nutrition now? You got to learn that, and there's new equipment now that you can do to make your crops grow faster, and you got to learn about that. So I think I used to say it was a bit patronizing when people would say, "Oh, well, farmers have so much on their plate." But now I totally accept that, if you're really trying to do a good job in your industry, it's a constant learning, and it's a constant there's just a barrage of information. And so if you're going to do AD, you really got to dedicate some time, and maybe it's just one person on your farm. Maybe it's you, or maybe it's your kid, or whatever it is that really can scrutinize your plan. And that's probably my biggest piece of advice. I know it's not easy.
Yeah, no, I love that, George. Well, we're definitely in the continuous improvement model game, right?
Yeah.
And both as humans and as an industry, I would say that rarely a day goes by that there's not something new that you need to think about. And definitely lots new in this game, of which you're a pioneer. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your genuine commitment to improving the body of knowledge and work around digesters. I really appreciate your time and what you're doing on your farm to feed our country. So thank you for that. Thanks to everyone for watching and listening. We will be adding some notes on the YouTube channel, so please check it out and share.